Now, Nigeria continues to experience rising attacks and abductions of civilians by armed extremist groups. In the latest development, unidentified gunmen abducted 27 students and some staff and their family members at a secondary school in the north-central Niger state. Independent Africa analyst Adetunji Omotola joins us now for more on the story. Adetunji, good evening and thank you so much for your time tonight. Certainly, when one looks at these kidnappings, the rate at which they're happening seems to be increasing, and one wonders if there's any clear plan by the government to bring them to an end.
Well, first of all, Kathy, this latest attack, which happened yesterday, 600 boys in a dormitory, a government science school in a place called Kagara in Rafi local government area of Niger state, which is contiguous to the Federal Capital Territory. These boys were sleeping at about 3 a.m. You had 300 bandits, so-called bandits, arrive on 33 motorbikes and decided to foist havoc on the school. They kidnapped 27 young boys. They took 3 members of staff and another 12 family members were abducted, bringing the total to 42, and they killed 1 young boy. So these attacks have become commonplace. On Monday, there was another 21. They were abducted. They were coming from, in the same state, they were coming from a wedding. And I believe about 10 of those have now since been released. So what is happening in Nigeria now? We have banditry, where people, groups, criminal gangs, especially from the north, they move around the country and they kidnap people for ransom. It's become a very big problem for the government. But the sad thing is that no one gets prosecuted and no one gets arrested and no one gets to resign. So the police are intact. None of them would take responsibility. None of them would resign. That's the sad thing about this whole debacle.
Of course, the position that many families find themselves in often when incidents like this have happened is that they are faced with the burden of either paying this ransom or never seeing their loved ones again. Why do the local authorities not get involved in that process? Or are people just at a point where they'd rather leave them out of these negotiations effectively that would need to be held with these kidnappers?
Well, what you'll probably understand, Kathy, is that you see, once there's a high profile, like this one is a high profile case, even though the numbers are much smaller than Chibok girls or Dapchi, or even just in December, about 340 students were kidnapped, boys in Kankara, in a place, Katsina State, where the president, Muhammadu Buhari, comes from. So once there are high-profile cases like this, as we see, the government gets involved. But typically, when there's smaller numbers and it's not high-profile, then the families are the ones that will be lumbered with the burden of raising the ransom money. But what it goes to show, really, is that the security architecture in Nigeria is still in the 16th century. The country is almost 1 million square kilometers, and the north of the country is very, very wide. It's the square kilometers to cover is just too big, and I don't think the Nigerian military are able to fight on so many centers. They're dealing with Boko Haram in the northeast. They're dealing with rampaging Fulani herdsmen who are going around the country, especially in the southern part, and killing farmers and looting and burning and raping. And now we have bandits who are well armed and well resourced, and they're determined to carry young boys, to carry out attacks and demand for ransom. So there needs to be a total rejig of the architecture. I personally believe that the Inspector General of Police should begin to consider resignation, because time after time when these attacks happen, no one takes responsibility. The buck does not stop anywhere, and the Nigerian citizenry are now living in fear. We don't know where next, who's next. It's just a total tragedy, especially a few days after another, what we saw in Lagos on Saturday, the beating of unarmed protesters, stripping them naked, smashing their cell phones. So Nigeria has become a country where life and property is, you become very vulnerable. Even if you're rich, you're not sure, you can't travel around the country. If you're not flying, then you have to stay where you are. It is a sad testimony. And the irony is that just a week ago, the AU has now elected a Nigerian to lead the all-powerful peace and security architecture, as well as political affairs. Well, I'll be looking for some kind of hope from the Ambassador Adeoye to begin to tell us what can we do about a country that has 200 million people, 20% of Africa's population, and every weekend we're hearing about abductions, killings, rapes, and no one takes responsibility, no one is arrested. It's business as usual. The president hardly ever speaks. Even on this one, there is no national address. He's quite aloof in my view, and sometimes not empathetic. And that is not good for a leader of a country that is the largest economy in Africa. I really find this very painful to talk about, almost on a daily basis, as if we're talking about dinner.
Let's stay then with the president and his role in trying to ensure that the level of violence is being brought under control. We have previously heard him say that, the Nigerian state was winning in terms of the fight against some of these insurgencies and military groups that are operating in the country, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, look, Boko Haram, as you know, is no longer a Nigerian franchise. They've changed their name. It's now the Islamic State for West Africa province. They're well-resourced. I think they're even more determined to foist havoc than the Nigerian military are to save lives. They've made that statement before. If you remember the report that came out when President Buhari came to power, the Amnesty International report, where they said, we maim, we kill, we shoot. Boko Haram is no longer a loose ragtag organization. They have all the architecture of a modern army. And what they do is a very good strategy they use to greater effect, to the greatest effect. They go to, the flanks of various states in Nigeria, places like Baga, places like Gamborungala, Tikwa, and all that. They know that the Nigerian military are stretched, that typically they will be in the cities like Maiduguri. So they go to a village where there's about 5,000 people in the middle of the night, and they foist havoc, and they kidnap and rape and kill. So I think the Nigerian military, led by President Muhammadu Buhari, the commander-in-chief, they have to sit down and have a war session and begin to talk about really mobilizing resources on a global scale, almost like what we've seen with the pandemic around coronavirus. Nigeria alone cannot manage. Of course, we have our internal dynamics, the tribal, religious, where people don't get prosecuted because you're my brother, you're my uncle, you're my auntie, we're the same religion. And that has made it very difficult to prosecute the war against these crazy insurgents whose stock in trade is to maim, kill, rape, and loot.
Independent Africa analyst Adetunji Omotola, let me thank you so much for your time on News at Prime tonight.